Hey guys, how's it going? It appears everything is working. So I just wanted to make sure. Uh, yeah, I'm just fiddling around with things for a second, trying to make it look decent. There we go. Now I'm in frame. How's it going, everybody? My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Shang-Chi, the Legend of the Ten Rings. And I really enjoyed this movie overall. I uh, wasn't really sure. I mean, I was optimistic about this because it felt like we were kind of finally stepping out of Avengers Endgame. The Spider Man Far From Home movie was pretty dry to me and only really came alive at the end when like Peter came back to New York. Um, and then Black Widow was pretty disappointing, and I did like that review already, obviously. So it felt like we kind of needed a movie like this to sort of step out of the shadow of Avengers and take us in a new direction, bring us into something new and exciting. And this was that movie. I thoroughly enjoyed myself from start to finish. It feels a lot like what sort of the early promise of the MCU was, and it still very much could and should be, which is like a collection of connected movies, but ones that can do different genres and explore different ideas. And a good example of that is this movie or something uh, like we've flirted with that idea before with like the Thor movies were originally kind of going to be more like the Shakespearean fantasy kind of thing. Shang-Chi, on the other hand, feels like a wonderful fusion of a prototypical MCU movie and then like a prototypical kung fu movie, but also Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Hero. It really reminded me of both of those movies, and they kind of, I think, deliberately evoke shots and ideas from those films, all sort of fused together into something that maybe samples from the comics a little bit, but also isn't afraid to adapt and make it into something that especially fits well with the MCU that already had the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, so we get Trevor back and then kind of redirect it to this other character who's used this 10 rings and established it as this real organization that existed for centuries, that, or if not thousands of years before Trevor was ever a thing. And I didn't expect Trevor to be such a huge part of this movie, but he really is and is a welcome presence. So I don't know how many spoilers we need to avoid at this point. The movie's been out for a couple weeks now. I'm going to plot ahead pretty thoroughly, but off the top, I will recommend it. It is a great movie, solid cast, and one of my favorite MCU movies to date. The Shadowcatcher says the movie was awesome. Yeah, I agree. The fights were amazing. It starts out so whimsically and really just focusing on, and we're going to call him the Mandarin, even though I understand very well what role that name has in this story and that it doesn't really define that character. And Shadowcatcher says, spoil away. And I don't even know if it's such a like spoilery dependent movie. I feel I could tell someone the basic premise of all of this and then just leave out a few little details, and there's still plenty of great surprises along the way. But I what I was talking about a little like just now was when I was saying like it just starts out so strong is yeah, we get all this stuff about the Mandarin's character, how his powers work, but then when he meets Shang-Chi and his sister's mom, and she's this guardian of this hidden village, and the way she fights him, I leaned over to my girlfriend and whispered, like, I called it flirt fighting almost. It was very cool. And we've already seen this guy, like, wipe out this Ottoman Empire of some kind, or, like, this whole fortress they had, and just destroying with his 10 rings. They are pretty much set up the same way they are in the comics, though I will state I like them in the comics a little more because in the comics, each of the 10 rings bestows a different power and does something. There's a reason they didn't do that in this movie, and I think I understand why, because it is about Shang-Chi, and they I think nicely tied it to the Mandarin's character because, and I didn't know this, Shang-Chi's real character or like father in the comics is Fu Manchu, a character that Marvel doesn't even own. And the director is saying, well, that's really racist, so we didn't want to do that. And he wanted to kind of redress the Mandarin, um, which I feel he didn't really have to inflect a lot of creativity. He just kind of used the version created by Matt Fraction, who interestingly is the first person thanked in the credits in that special thanks section. So uh, they kind of turned him into more of a formal leader, someone who has like these corporate ties and stuff, and a more powerful, dignified figurehead than the earlier days of him being like this kind of goofy Iron Man villain. Uh, if you haven't, I highly recommend you watch the Hail to the King short film they made like a decade ago that's on Disney Plus. That nicely patches things between what happened to Trevor in Iron Man 3 and what happens to him in this movie. But otherwise, I don't know if you need to know much. I did kind of get my girlfriend to watch all the relevant films for this, like Doctor Strange, The Incredible Hulk, and what was the one we were just talked about? uh, this thing. Oh well, that's not important. But and so we were catching up on these movies. I have that list written down somewhere here. But anyways, like, and it didn't really feel like it was too important. Oh, Iron Man 3, obviously, which introduces Trevor, so that she'd be familiar with these characters. But she's not fully caught up with Avengers Endgame and stuff, and she still enjoyed this. So someone who's kind of like half into the MCU at this point enjoyed this movie just as much as I did, and was really invested in this villain and this hero, and was really rooting for Shang-Chi, Katie, and like the sister throughout the whole thing, which was great. But the way that the mom and dad are fighting in this initial thing, not only does it kind of show how they fall in love, but it was just so interesting visually and really nicely set the tone for the rest of the movie. There's all these interesting shots. There's a shot of Shang-Chi fighting this one dude in this construction site, and there's like this like a digital screen across the street in the background, so there's just like this animated lighting to the backing of them fighting. It's hard to describe in words, but really easy to see visually, and I'm sure everyone who's seen it knows kind of what I'm referring to. There's a great little homage, I think, to Hero with the wall of arrows, but we've seen that in other stuff before, and I found that really fun. And then that kind of introduces us to the Mandarin. I really enjoyed how they set up certain stuff. Like there's this mystical realm they go to and stuff, and that's pretty cool. But even just the look of like the design of the Mandarin's home is interesting, and they do some cool stuff with that. The casting is spot on, not only with Shang-Chi and the Mandarin, but all of these characters, down to like the Mandarin's top minion has a bit of a personality and a story to him. It's not like this terribly significant character or anything, but he has this car that the heroes steal at one point, and it's a very distinct car, so it says a little bit about him. And by the end, there is like, it's not a huge character arc for this random minion, but it feels like there's progress and a change to this character in an interesting way. And I really like kind of when like even little roles like that are filled in. I like how Shang-Chi kind of knows a lot of this stuff. He was raised by his dad. He wasn't really an outsider. He did eventually break away from his father for a good 10 years, where he lived in America and grew up with this girl named Katie, who's played by Awkwafina, and she's delightful as always. I thought she added so much to the film because of that, she's the outsider who gets explained to everything. And it felt really natural, because that way Shang-Chi knew how to fight. He knew about his sister. He had that familial connection. When he sees his dad again, it's not like this angry confrontation. They have this respect for each other from start to finish, basically. I kind of like their relationship, and how like father and son kind of go out and like when Shang-Chi is much younger and he trains the kid to be an assassin, and while Shang-Chi is brutally treated in that process, there is love in all of that. And it's made very clear not only that this father loves his son, but also that he respects him in little ways. We know it's made very clear that the Mandarin knows exactly where Shang-Chi has always been, even when he ran away from home. And he just wanted to let his son live his life, for like let the kid live his own life for a while, which I think is a really sweet and sincere thing. I was talking about the casting, but one thing I really also appreciated is the teenager Shang-Chi and even the kid Shang-Chi are all well acted. There's different actors playing these different characters as we go through different time periods, and we jump around a lot, but it's never done in a way that I found annoying and always, always added to the story. So, for example, we see a flashback with the mom, and then we might see that another flashback to the same scene where we see like the mom talking to her son, adding context to a later part of the story. It's really tightly written and edited. It's so phenomenal in that regard. In terms of like casting, acting, editing, all these technical things, it's a beautiful film. And like that goes into the cinematography and stuff, but even just how it's structured as a story, I really liked it, and it really had me invested in these characters. Shin Venomzilla, thanks for joining us. I'm getting weird numbers for viewers where it's just jumping up and down, so I don't know, but anyways, so a very strong movie overall, and where there are weaknesses is little things in how it's written and stuff like that, where it almost feels like it has to do these MCU things that take away from it a little bit. Like Trevor's funny, and he's got a lot of funny stuff to do, and he's got an important role in this story, but he is there for comedic relief, and it is that MCU brand of humor, which feels a little out of place with this movie. That's all very interesting and kind of dark, but also sweet and sincere. This is one of the only movies I can, well, okay, because I'm gonna have to clarify this in a second, but in terms of a relationship between an aunt and her nephew, this is a really well done story when we do get to meet Shang-Chi's aunt, and I thought those scenes were handled so well and added so much to the movie. And I say I have to clarify that because obviously we have stuff with like Aunt May, but that's more of her taking on a mother role. This was very much an aunt and her nephew kind of reconnecting after, well, never really getting to meet, other than like she maybe got to meet the baby at one point. And I thought it was well handled given like what happened to the mom and stuff, and liked it on the whole. My only other complaint is I talked about how beautiful it is, and that's the cinematography. Anytime that the director's clearly involved, it's the first unit, and they're filming on sets and establishing things and planning this stuff out, it looks great. The outsourced CGI, there's this awesome fight scene on the bus, but man, does that CGI look rough at times during the bus scene, and this encounter with this soul eater creature near the end. There's some CGI that looks better than others. So it's a little disappointing, I guess we'll say, because it took me. Tevya, thanks for joining us, by the way, and I'm doing well. I hope you are too. I was just invested in what I was saying, because like the CGI, I felt a little frustrated by, because some of it looked great. The 10 rings looked good. Some of the little things that maybe aren't obviously CGI looked great. Like the forest was done really well, or the fight scene between the mom and the Mandarin at the beginning had a lot of CGI, but it looked great. But the stuff that I mentioned, like the bus, the Soul Eater stuff, some of those were real rough looking, and my frustration is on a couple of counts. Sorry, I hit something metal down there, I guess. Anyways, my frustration is how these movies work is 5 or 6 companies at a minimum, and I wasn't really watching this time in the credits, but they are all there, to do these effects. And the Mandarin, his rings, those effects are done like by one company, that bus was done by another company, the Soul Eater was done by a third company, and so on and so forth. They divvy it up like that. That's not unreasonable, but it becomes difficult to keep a consistent CGI, and it's a bit of a recurring problem, especially in the latter half of these MCU movies. And I think it is also worth talking about how this is done to reduce labor costs. So Marvel's being cheap in this regard. And it kind of feels like Marvel spent a little less money than they normally do for this movie. Just, it's a feeling I got while watching it compared to the average MCU movie, because it's Shang-Chi, and I guess it is a bit of an unknown. I almost think that it doesn't need as much of a budget, but then if we're going to go in that direction, then we need stuff with a little less CGI, or we need to find little cuts in that regard just to make things look a little tighter at key spots, or just some more quality control around some of the effects, because some of them looked great. The stuff around the construction site, where all the construction scaffolding is done with bamboo sticks, was so interesting, and just kind of like a sort of like, it's something that only is going to happen in like out east, as opposed to somewhere like Vegas or something like that, where it's going to be like the more Americanized construction equipment and stuff. And it looked great. A lot of that was CGI, and I'm perfectly aware of that, but it looked amazing and was consistent in that regard. So these are all minor things. All of the CGI could look like garbage, which isn't true, but it all could be garbage, and the movie could be amazing, because everything else I said is still true. All the acting is great. I really like the cinematography, and the story itself is really fun. Tevye saying Shang-Chi was tons of fun. I thought the Mandarin was freaking fantastic, and yeah, I agree with all your points there. It was a really polished story too, and that made it easy to get invested in it, and it lets me excuse a lot in terms of not only the CGI but also the writing itself. Because one thing that did bother me a little bit is it does feel like, yeah, we had that obligatory humor in the form of Trevor. We also had our obligatory cameos. It was cool though that like Tim Roth came back to do some uncredited voice work as the Abomination, given that the thing's like roaring and groaning only. But it has a little fight cage match with Wong, which is bizarre but entertaining and amusing. Wong's role in the story is pretty fun on the whole, and he gets some really like choice moments, even though he doesn't appear a ton in this movie. It really surprised me that his role is relatively minimal compared to Trevor, who has a robust role in this film. So I just didn't expect that. Shin Venomzilla said, I thought the film was mid. I assumed like mid-tier is what you say. I like some of the I feel like some of the characters could have had more depth. Like, we knew what made Shang-Chi tick and Wang Wo tick, but I feel like I needed more of Shang-Chi's sister, and Katie needed more. And then Shin Venomzilla said, Diddy, Abomination didn't really speak. Apparently, I'm going by what Wikipedia says, but Wikipedia also said it's cited. So I'm guessing he's the one who was roaring and groaning and whatever, which is funny, but it's like, okay. And my guess is maybe he recorded that when he was like doing some recordings for a What If episode or something like that, because otherwise it seems like a really small role, but it's fun. Or maybe he just agreed to do it in the hopes that Abomination will show up again one day, because that was funny. And this movie feels deeply ingrained in the rest of the MCU. But what Shin Venomzilla is saying is interesting, and I certainly don't disagree. There's definitely way more focus on father and son, whereas sister and I think it's Katie, I want to say, because he said Kitty in there, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Like, they could use a little more development. I agree. I think it's also fair to say that there's a reason this movie focuses on the father and son dynamic and stuff, because in the future there's a lot of room for Katie, and especially because Awkwafina is so great, but also the sister to really like take on more of a role going forward. And so will Shang-Chi, obviously, but this is his movie. And I was kind of thinking that, like, man, this is cool and all, but once again, like, we have another MCU movie with a badass sister, or not sister, but a badass, like, secondary female character who, for whatever reason, doesn't get their own movie and just has to play second fiddle. Even though in some ways the sister's more interesting than Shang-Chi is. She, like, went out on her own and started her own, like, cage match empire in Hong Kong, I'm pretty sure. And is like trained herself to become an assassin, even though her dad was a sexist dick. But also we kind of learn, like, he owns up to it a lot and says, like, I made a lot of mistakes when your mother was gone and stuff, and I just couldn't face you being sister, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name, but no one in chat seems to. It's like uh, Zhu Yang or something like that. But she's like she's got a lot of growth to her, I think. But it is nice how like he kind of said like, okay, I did treat you badly, and he acknowledged it on some level. It's something, I guess. Tevye says, I thought the film was freaking fantastic, just kind of responding to Shin. I think Shin makes some solid points, and I can see where someone would be less excited about it. And it's not like a perfect movie. So when I say like it looks similar to something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or Hero, that doesn't mean they're on the same level. And I remember in particular seeing Hero in theaters, and like this was a long time ago now, but it was just so beautiful and interesting looking and stuff. And it's not that, but it is really cool seeing a comic book movie like inflect all of that stuff, and it does feel like such a welcome addition to the MCU. And it does leave me pretty excited for stuff. Like I didn't know if Mark Ruffalo still was going to be involved as the Hulk going forward in MCU stuff, but this movie, you know, tells us basically he is, and there's a couple other fun cameos, and even something that I kind of interpret as a reference to Fin Fang Foom in the future, because the rings are like sending a beacon out into space or something, and we don't really know their origins. There's a lot of cool stuff in the future, and I hope Shang-Chi gets to be an Avenger. Simu wants to be an Avenger, I think. I read some article about that. Shin was saying it had great moments with Shang's origin, though. I like so much how that was handled. I was saying that earlier, but the pacing and placement of those flashbacks and how that's all executed is brilliant, and also didn't feel stale. This is an origin story. I think we can all kind of agree to that, but it was done in such a creative and artistic way that it's not like any other comic book movie origin story thing, and that really gave it some strength. Tevye says, I think it does open the door for the She-Hulk. Oh, in reference to the Abomination. That makes sense. Yeah, I like I said, that's how I interpreted it earlier. Like, it feels like Tim Roth wouldn't just do that for no reason. That's a big actor to just have growling into a mic for 5 minutes. And it's unlikely that was done independent of anything else. So, I'm not sure if there's anything else I have to say about this. It's a really strong movie overall. It was so refreshing. If people want to say stuff in chat, though, I'll stick around for a minute and we'll talk about that. And I'm really looking forward to it. Next up will be Venom, Let There Be Carnage. And we saw the trailer for that before this movie, and I was neutral, I guess. The movie's only an hour and a half long, which reminds me a lot of the first Venom movie, where it's like, well, it wasn't the funniest thing in the world, and a lot of the jokes fell flat for me in the trailer once again, and it feels like we're just doing the same thing again in that regard. Woody Harrelson just does feel weird as Carnage, but he looked a little better than in the end of the first Venom movie. But like in an hour and a half, it at least doesn't ask so much. That like I found the first one a pretty pleasant viewing experience on the whole, and it impressed me more than it disappointed me. So I'm pretty excited for that. And also I'm hoping that like maybe Venom 2 can polish some of the problems I had with Venom 1. Then we also saw, because it's funny, we saw the trailers for all 3 of the movies that are coming out this year. So the other one was the Spider-Man, well wait, before that is Eternals, and we saw the trailer for that, and it looks cool, and it was fun seeing a couple of Celestials appear in there. I don't know what that movie's going to be, but honestly, the trailer made me think, like, you know, it's going to be pretty standalone. We had to introduce that whole team and stuff, and even the way that trailer's set up, it's very clearly like its own thing. Like everything else, it's going to have references to the rest of the MCU. And something I noticed is just like how all these MCU properties would refer to the first Avengers movie like obliquely with like, oh, what happened in New York and the events and all that. It seems like a lot of these post-Endgame things are just often paying lip service to this stuff and being like, oh, well, now that it's post-blip, this is what's happening post-blip. And I like the connective tissue, but I would prefer more creativity to that. Falcon and Winter Soldier was touching on that stuff, where there were economic and political consequences to the blip, which is more interesting. And this movie didn't use the words "the blip," which is helpful too, just in terms of making it stomach a little more. And then Tevi was saying Spider-Man No Way Home, he's excited about. That trailer also played. We saw that trailer before, as I'm sure everyone has. But man, yeah, I'm excited for that. I know the rumor mill has gone insane. I do want to caution people not to get too excited about it. It's just like I said with WandaVision, where it's like if you let those theories and rumors get to your head, you're going to get disappointed. But there's going to be some fun surprises in No Way Home. I think we can all agree with that either way. It's just if you suddenly give yourself a laundry list of things you want, where it's like, I want Tobey Maguire to show up, I want Andrew Garfield to show up, I want the entire Sinister Six to be in this movie, I want references to the X-Men, you're going to get disappointed. We need to... It should be its own contained story, and it shouldn't be bloated and insane and rambly like this. So it looks like it'll be fun, and it looks like it's going to really expand some of this multiverse stuff they're clearly teasing. But what I like about Shang-Chi is it didn't get bloated with MCU references or stuff like that, and it felt very standalone. Where it was weaker is sometimes it did divert itself to make those references and stuff, and if anything, that was a bit of a distraction from what would have otherwise just continued on to the story. But it does, like... And when I say that, I mean, like, they have a dinner early on, and, like, Katie and Shang-Chi are sitting down with this couple, and the couple's talking about, oh, you can't just be valets post-blip and stuff. And that felt like a distraction. And then you have something like the fight. There's this cage match between Abomination and Wong. And that is a bit more of a mixed bag, because I liked it. It felt like it added something where we just show up to a cage match and someone's using magic, and at first I didn't even recognize Wong, like when we see him from a bit of a distance, but I recognized the spells, and I was like, you know, that's cool. It's a shared universe where stuff like that can show up, and that stuff works. But then at a certain point, that scene started to feel a bit like a distraction. So it is about kind of navigating that. I think Shang-Chi does well with it overall, but I could see it annoying some people, and it was a bit of a distraction at times. Shin was saying, I have faith in Andy Serkis. I think with his experience with the Planet of the Apes films, he can do a great job with the actors. What's Andy Serkis directing? I gotta look this up now. Is he doing... I know he's not doing the Eternals, because that's Chow Zhao. Did I miss something in chat? Is that what's going on? These are actor credits. Oh, he's directing Venom. See, that's pretty cool, because Andy Serkis also has an understanding of motion capture and stuff like that, which would serve as well for Venom. I didn't know that, and that actually increased my level of excitement for the film. Because, like, I don't want to be a downer for Venom, but that's a cool little bit of information I did not know. Tevia Smoke was saying, all I want is a good Spider-Man movie. It feels like a grounded Peter Pan Spider-Man movie. Well, that's the thing, is like we can't have a million cameos and interesting things and it still feel like a polished Spider-Man movie. But I think the people behind the scenes of that know this, and they aren't going to fill it with like MCU build-up stuff, and it's going to be its own self-contained story, as it should be. Darkside, thanks for joining us. We're just chatting Shang-Chi and having a good time. Tevi says, I, however, don't see that happening, sadly, in reference to what Tevi was just saying about the Peter Parker thing. I'm a little more optimistic than that. I'm a lot more optimistic for this new Spider-Man movie, which feels like it's coming out real fast after Far From Home, but whatever. Than I am for Far From Home. Like, I realized Far From Home was a bit of a dud and stuff, but it feels like this is a huge step forward in terms of being this exciting thing that also can have a bit of heart to it. We're hopefully going to get that as well, because Far From Home was also empty in that regard, and Homecoming was a little lacking. So maybe I get what you're saying, Tevia. Mitch Cowan said, greatest MCU movie, oh please, it was good, but not great and not the greatest. That's just ridiculous. I, at the very least, definitely say greatest. I was doing a Colbert reference from way back in the day there, but I was just having some fun. Yeah, I definitely think, like, even as we were talking it out and everything, I am not sure I would go with greatest either. But the thing is, to me, it certainly competes with that. And I get, like, we've talked about some of the criticisms as we've gone on throughout this stream, and I definitely think there's valid problems with it. But to me, it's top tier for so many reasons when compared to other MCU movies, because it looks and feels different. It was a different experience and was like this polished, focused character bit. And it definitely is up there with like Black Panther for me. I know I've ranked the MCU movies before, but that stuff's fluid. And as I've been revisiting some of the earlier MCU movies with my girlfriend, I'm finding that I'm liking a lot of the earlier ones more than I remembered. And it's starting to skew everything. And so like, I'd have to redo the ranking completely and stuff like that. But Mitch makes some interesting points. I'd even put Phase 1 origin movies as just as solid, if not better, story-wise. There were some points in the movie, like the background explainers, that were cringy. I don't know what you're really referring to there, but fair enough. I liked it overall, though. And definitely not as much as Mitch didn't seem to. But yeah, you're really bordering on it there, buddy. I'll just say that. Like, it's just weird how some people are. But I digress. I'm not going to repeat all that. Like, it's weird. It's mocking. But I digress. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. We'll say it's just of a certain age thing to be nice. And go with that. But yeah, so thanks everyone for having a mostly pleasant chat and stream and stuff and all that. I'm not saying that you can't disagree. It's just it's interesting. I'm not even saying that I feel mocked. It's just it's weird. But I digress. And yeah, that threw me off. Just like, what's bordering on? It's bordering on you bullying other people's opinions or something. Call it what you want, but it is what it is, man. You're literally cackling at someone's opinion. And like, I'm not even saying that like to defend that or whatever. It's just like, there's a way to is that an ageist comment? Nice. Okay. Well, congratulations. That's how you get shadow banned. Like, there's just a certain level of snark that's just not worth dealing with. Anyway, Venomzilla is saying it's cool. No, it is cool because this is how you obliviate someone from the channel and filter things. Yeah, anyways, I'll see you guys next for that stream or whatever. But I don't want to end on that note, though. So I will say this. It's interesting that we have 3 MCU well, not MCU, but like, I'm interested to see if Venom has any cameos for Spider-Man and stuff, because I kind of get why they didn't have that cameo in the first Venom movie, but it would be pretty cool if there was some nod to Peter Parker at some point, because right now I don't fully understand that connective tissue. And we were talking about how like quick this Spider-Man movie comes out, and I'm sure that has something to do with Sony's business. So we'll have to see. Because it just occurred to me now that, like, we're getting into this world of, like, what I'm saying is we have all this multiverse stuff, and I'm suddenly very curious if Sony's big thing was, like, we're only going to do one more Spider-Man movie in the MCU, like, if this is going to kind of take Spider-Man out of the MCU. And I really hope that isn't the case. But it is just interesting that like we have all this stuff left, and then DC, we have to wait till next year. But I am hoping that we do kind of get a more even pace going forward, because the last DC movie, The Suicide Squad, was also awesome. And having both really kind of feels like it would be the ideal world for us fans. And I think that's just a friendlier note to end things on. But yeah, anyways, we'll see you guys next time, and y'all have a good day.